We need to make it easier for the monarch to just simply strip the titles of people that they don't think are representing them in an appropriate manner.
At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a routine adjustment inside the royal calendar, the sort of administrative decision that rarely attracts public attention. Yet within hours, whispers began spreading through palace corridors, and royal observers started asking the same unsettling question. Had something far more significant just happened behind closed doors? And if so, who truly stood to gain from it? The story began not with a grand ceremony or a dramatic public announcement, but with a decision that seemed almost invisible to anyone outside the royal household. According to reports circulating among palace insiders, a change had been approved that altered the order of precedence surrounding an upcoming high-profile engagement. On paper, it looked procedural. In practice, however, some believed it carried enormous symbolic weight. What made the situation so intriguing was the individual suddenly placed at the center of the conversation: Catherine, Princess of Wales. For years, Catherine has occupied a unique position within the royal family. Unlike many public figures who command attention through controversy or confrontation, she has generally built her reputation through patience, consistency, and a carefully cultivated image of stability. Royal watchers often describe her as one of the institution's strongest assets, someone capable of connecting tradition with a modern audience while avoiding unnecessary conflict. Yet that reputation has also created a fascinating question. If Catherine's influence continues to grow, what happens to the existing balance of power inside the monarchy? That question became impossible to ignore when reports emerged suggesting that her role at an upcoming royal function had been elevated in a way that many observers considered highly unusual. Some commentators argued it was simply recognition of her future position as queen consort beside Prince William, the Prince of Wales. Others suspected there was a deeper message hidden beneath the protocol itself. And that is where the story becomes considerably more complicated. Inside royal institutions, status is rarely communicated through dramatic speeches. Instead, it is often expressed through symbols that most people barely notice: seating arrangements, processions, order of arrival, placement in official photographs. To outsiders, these details may seem trivial, but within royal circles they can carry enormous meaning. When one person's position changes, questions inevitably follow. Was the adjustment merely practical? Was it a sign of confidence from King Charles III? Or was it intended to signal something about the future direction of the monarchy itself? The uncertainty generated immediate speculation. Some royal commentators pointed to the king's ongoing efforts to modernize certain aspects of the institution. Since ascending the throne, Charles has frequently spoken about creating a monarchy that remains relevant in a changing world. Supporters of this view argued that elevating Catherine's visibility would be entirely consistent with that objective. After all, public opinion surveys have repeatedly shown strong support for both the Princess of Wales and Prince William. But not everyone interpreted the development in the same way. Among longtime palace observers, another theory began gaining traction. They noted that whenever a future heir and future queen become increasingly prominent, tensions can emerge between different generations of royal leadership. Not necessarily open conflict, but competing visions of how the institution should evolve. Was this one of those moments? No official statement answered that question directly. Instead, the silence surrounding the matter seemed to fuel even greater curiosity. The absence of clarification allowed competing narratives to flourish. Some saw strategic planning. Others saw symbolic succession management. A few even wondered whether palace insiders were intentionally allowing speculation to grow. The mystery deepened further when preparations began for a major diplomatic gathering expected to attract influential guests from around the world. Such events are carefully choreographed down to the smallest detail. Every entrance, every seating assignment, every camera angle is reviewed repeatedly. Mistakes are rare because too much is at stake. The royal family understands that global audiences often interpret symbolism just as closely as policy. That reality meant one simple question suddenly carried enormous significance. When the guests finally arrived, where exactly would Catherine be placed? The answer mattered because it could reveal whether the reported changes were genuine, temporary, or part of something much larger. Meanwhile, another development was unfolding quietly behind the scenes. As anticipation grew around Catherine's expanding role, attention also shifted toward Queen Camilla. Although public focus often centers on the younger generation, Camilla remains a senior and highly visible member of the monarchy. Any perceived adjustment involving hierarchy or prominence inevitably invites comparisons, whether fair or unfair. Royal commentators began debating what the evolving dynamic might mean for both women. Was the media exaggerating ordinary protocol decisions, or were observers witnessing the early stages of a broader transition inside the institution? No one seemed to agree. What everyone did agree on, however, was that the upcoming gala would provide the first real test. For the first time, the rumors, theories, and whispered conversations would collide with reality in front of diplomats, dignitaries, and cameras. If the reports were accurate, the entire world would see evidence of a changing royal order. If they were not, weeks of speculation could disappear overnight. But as the palace prepared for that crucial evening, something unexpected was already beginning to unfold behind the scenes, something that would transform a quiet debate about royal protocol into a far larger story about loyalty, influence, and the future of the monarchy. And what happened next would leave even seasoned royal watchers asking whether they had completely misunderstood the situation from the very beginning. The possibility that this was merely a question of seating arrangements began to fade as more people inside royal circles examined the broader implications. What seemed increasingly significant was not where someone sat during a single engagement, but what the entire episode might reveal about the future structure of influence surrounding the crown. For decades, royal transitions have rarely happened overnight. They unfold gradually through subtle shifts in visibility, responsibility, and public perception. Long before a formal transfer of authority ever takes place, the institution often begins signaling where it sees its future. That reality led some commentators to focus less on protocol and more on timing. Why now? The question lingered because the monarchy currently finds itself navigating one of the most consequential periods in recent history. King Charles III continues to define his reign while simultaneously preparing the institution for the eventual era of Prince William, the Prince of Wales. Those two objectives are connected, yet they are not identical. One concerns the present stability of the crown. The other concerns what comes next. Some royal analysts began suggesting that Catherine's increasingly prominent role might be understood within that larger framework. Rather than viewing individual appearances in isolation, they pointed toward a pattern developing over several years. The Princess of Wales had steadily expanded her portfolio, deepened her involvement in major initiatives, and strengthened her international profile without attracting the kind of controversy that often complicates royal transitions. That observation prompted another intriguing question. Was the institution simply benefiting from her popularity, or was it actively investing in her future position? The distinction mattered. Within constitutional monarchies, public confidence can become one of the most valuable forms of political capital. Unlike elected leaders, members of the royal family derive influence largely from trust, continuity, and symbolic leadership. If one figure consistently attracts public goodwill, the institution naturally takes notice. Yet popularity alone has never guaranteed influence inside royal households. History offers numerous examples of highly admired royal figures whose public appeal did not necessarily translate into institutional authority. Real power often depends upon relationships, trust networks, and alignment with the monarch's long-term vision. That is why some observers became increasingly interested in reports describing the relationship between Charles and Catherine as one built on mutual respect rather than simple family obligation. If those reports were accurate, the implications could be profound. Rather than representing two separate generations operating independently, the King and the Princess of Wales might be pursuing complementary objectives. One focused on preserving stability in the present, the other focused on securing continuity for the future. Suddenly, the discussion was no longer about personalities. It was about strategy. Meanwhile, attention inside royal circles began shifting toward another sensitive issue that few commentators openly addressed. Every institution develops internal cultures over time. Some individuals embrace change. Others prefer continuity. Neither position is inherently unusual. However, moments of transition often expose underlying differences that remain hidden during quieter periods. Several palace watchers noted that debates surrounding modernization have existed within royal households for generations. Questions about communication, public engagement, charitable priorities, and institutional reform rarely disappear completely. Instead, they evolve as new figures assume greater responsibility. Could current events be exposing those differences once again? No definitive evidence answered that question, but speculation continued to grow precisely because so many details remained unexplained. The approaching diplomatic gala only intensified that atmosphere. Far from being an ordinary social gathering, the event carried considerable symbolic importance. International representatives would be present. Media coverage would be extensive. Every visual detail would be analyzed by audiences across multiple countries. In other words, if the monarchy intended to communicate something significant without explicitly saying it, this would be the perfect stage. As preparations accelerated, another fascinating development emerged. Rather than responding publicly to the rumors surrounding her growing status, Catherine maintained remarkable silence. There were no interviews, no carefully crafted statements, no visible effort to shape the narrative. To some observers, that silence itself became meaningful. Why avoid addressing a story that dominated royal commentary? One interpretation suggested confidence, another suggested caution. A third possibility was even more intriguing. Perhaps those closest to the situation understood something that the public did not. The lack of clarification created a vacuum, and vacuums inside royal reporting rarely remain empty for long. Soon, competing theories multiplied. Some believed the Princess of Wales was simply being prepared for a more prominent ceremonial role. Others argued that the institution was quietly demonstrating where its long-term priorities now resided. A few commentators even wondered whether the monarchy was entering a new phase altogether, one in which public-facing influence would gradually shift toward the younger generation well before any constitutional necessity required it. Each theory raised additional questions. If Catherine's prominence was increasing, what responsibilities might follow? How would other senior royals adapt to evolving expectations? And perhaps most importantly, what message would international audiences take from these developments? The answers remained elusive. Yet beneath every discussion lay a deeper issue that extended beyond any individual family member. Monarchies survive not simply because of tradition, but because they continually convince each generation that they remain relevant. Managing that balance between continuity and renewal has challenged royal households for centuries. Some observers believe they were witnessing exactly that process unfold in real time. Others caution that appearances can be deceptive and that public interpretations often reveal more about expectations than reality. But before anyone could determine which explanation was correct, events surrounding the gala began taking an unexpected turn. Quiet conversations inside palace circles reportedly grew more urgent. Questions that once seemed theoretical suddenly appeared connected to something far more immediate. And as the evening of the highly anticipated gathering approached, a series of developments behind closed doors threatened to transform an already sensitive situation into a story that would be impossible for the monarchy to ignore. Yet the closer observers looked at the situation, the more they began to suspect that the gala itself was never the true story. The event was simply the stage upon which a much larger drama might be playing out, one rooted not in personalities alone, but in the monarchy's struggle to define its future identity. What made the circumstances particularly fascinating was the contrast between public visibility and private influence. In modern royal life, those two forces do not always move together. A figure can dominate headlines while possessing little real institutional weight, while another may quietly shape decisions without attracting significant attention. Increasingly, some royal commentators wondered whether Catherine's rise reflected an unusual convergence of both. The Princess of Wales had become one of the most recognizable members of the royal family internationally, but unlike many prominent public figures, her influence appeared to stem from restraint rather than self-promotion. That distinction mattered because institutions often place extraordinary value on individuals who can attract attention without appearing to seek it. Could that quality explain why certain palace decisions seemed to be moving in her direction? Some analysts pointed toward a recurring pattern visible throughout royal history. Whenever monarchies enter periods of uncertainty, they often elevate figures capable of embodying stability. During times of transition, symbolism becomes more important, not less. The public begins looking for reassurance, continuity, and confidence that the institution remains secure. Viewed through that lens, Catherine's growing prominence could represent something far more significant than personal advancement. It might represent preparation. Preparation not necessarily for an immediate constitutional change, but for an era that many inside royal circles already understand is approaching. The future reign of Prince William is no longer a distant abstraction. It is increasingly becoming part of strategic planning. And if that planning is already underway, another question naturally emerges. How far ahead is the palace thinking? That question became especially intriguing because reports and commentary surrounding the monarchy often focus on visible events while overlooking the institution's long-term mindset. Royal households traditionally think in years and decades rather than news cycles. Decisions that appear sudden to the public may have been discussed internally for months or even years. Some palace watchers, therefore, began asking whether recent developments reflected a coordinated vision rather than isolated decisions. If so, who was helping shape that vision? Attention gradually shifted toward the relationship between the king and the future generation of royal leadership. While media coverage often emphasizes differences between generations, successful monarchies typically depend upon cooperation between them. The challenge is balancing present authority with future legitimacy. Charles occupies a unique position in that equation. Having spent decades preparing for kingship, the monarch understands perhaps better than anyone the complexities of succession, expectation, and public scrutiny. That experience may provide insights unavailable to younger members of the family. At the same time, the next generation faces a dramatically different environment. Social media, global news cycles, and shifting public expectations have transformed the way royal figures interact with audiences. Strategies that worked decades ago may no longer be sufficient. This creates a fascinating tension. How does a centuries-old institution modernize without appearing to abandon tradition? Some observers believe that question lies at the center of many recent developments. Rather than choosing between old and new approaches, the monarchy may be attempting something more delicate, combining historical legitimacy with contemporary relevance. In that context, figures capable of navigating both worlds become extraordinarily valuable. The Princess of Wales frequently appears in discussions about that balance because she represents an unusual combination of qualities. She projects continuity while appealing to younger audiences. She respects royal traditions while embracing modern causes. Most importantly, she often accomplishes both simultaneously. But that observation led to another mystery. If Catherine's role is expanding as part of a broader institutional strategy, what challenges might accompany that expansion? History suggests that greater visibility often brings greater scrutiny. Expectations rise. Symbolic actions attract deeper analysis. Every appearance, speech, and decision begins carrying additional significance. Some royal historians have noted that transitions within monarchies rarely proceed without resistance, even when that resistance remains largely invisible to the public. Established institutions naturally contain competing perspectives about priorities, methods, and future direction. That does not necessarily imply open conflict. More often, it manifests through subtle disagreements about emphasis, timing, and strategy. Could some of those dynamics be influencing current events? The absence of clear answers only intensified public curiosity. Every new report seemed to raise additional questions rather than resolve existing ones. Instead of clarifying the picture, each development revealed another layer beneath it. Meanwhile, as anticipation surrounding the diplomatic gathering continued to build, attention increasingly shifted toward what observers expected to happen once cameras arrived and formal proceedings began. The significance of the evening no longer appeared tied solely to ceremonial arrangements. Something larger seemed to be at stake. Not because of a single seat, a single event, or a single individual, but because the gathering offered a rare opportunity to observe how the monarchy wished to present itself to the world at a pivotal moment in its evolution. And then another intriguing detail began circulating among royal commentators. Several observers suggested that what the public was preparing to witness might not be the beginning of the story at all. Instead, it could represent the final stage of decisions already made behind closed doors, decisions whose consequences would only become visible once the evening unfolded. If that interpretation proved correct, then everything discussed so far, from the speculation surrounding Catherine's position to the questions about the institution's future, might ultimately be connected to a strategy far more ambitious than anyone initially imagined. And when the first guests finally enter the Grand Hall, the most revealing development would not be who occupied a particular place, but what that placement revealed about the monarchy's next chapter. As the evening drew closer, the atmosphere surrounding the situation began to change in a way that even experienced royal observers found difficult to ignore. What had started as speculation about symbolism was increasingly being discussed as a potential test of authority. Not authority in the constitutional sense, but something equally important inside royal institutions: the ability to shape the narrative of the future before that future officially arrives. The reason this mattered became clearer when attention turned toward those responsible for protecting the monarchy's long-term stability. Every major royal household contains advisors, officials, and senior figures whose primary responsibility is safeguarding continuity. Their work rarely attracts headlines, yet their influence can be considerable. According to various royal commentators, moments involving succession planning often generate the greatest internal sensitivity because decisions made today may affect perceptions for decades. If Catherine's visibility was indeed increasing through deliberate planning, then those closest to the center of power would have understood exactly how carefully such changes needed to be managed. That realization introduced a new layer to the story. Rather than asking whether certain developments were accidental or intentional, observers began asking whether they formed part of a broader effort to prepare public expectations. After all, institutions frequently introduce change gradually to avoid creating unnecessary disruption. Sudden transformation attracts resistance. Incremental adjustment often attracts acceptance. Could that be what audiences were witnessing? The question gained momentum because of how different senior members of the royal family appeared to be approaching public duties during this period. While King Charles III continued emphasizing stability, service, and continuity, the Prince and Princess of Wales increasingly represented energy, renewal, and the future. The contrast was not necessarily contradictory. In fact, it may have been complementary. Yet complementary relationships can still create challenges. The more prominent the future becomes, the more people begin comparing it with the present. That dynamic is not unique to monarchies. It occurs in politics, business, and virtually every institution that experiences generational transition. Public attention naturally gravitates toward what comes next. For palace strategists, that reality presents a delicate balancing act. How do you elevate the next generation without diminishing the current one? That question may explain why every public appearance, every ceremonial role, and every symbolic gesture suddenly attracted such intense scrutiny. What might seem minor to casual observers can appear deeply significant to those studying institutional signals. Meanwhile, another consequence was beginning to emerge beyond palace walls. Media coverage itself was becoming part of the story. As commentators debated the implications of Catherine's growing influence, public interest expanded far beyond traditional royal audiences. Discussions that might once have remained confined to specialist circles were increasingly reaching international viewers. People who rarely followed royal protocol found themselves drawn into questions about leadership, succession, and the monarchy's future direction. This shift created both opportunities and risks. On one hand, increased attention can strengthen relevance. On the other, heightened visibility inevitably increases pressure. Expectations become harder to manage. Every action becomes subject to interpretation. Every silence invites speculation. Some royal historians pointed out that this phenomenon has repeated throughout modern royal history. Figures perceived as representing the future often attract extraordinary levels of attention long before they officially assume greater responsibility. Public fascination grows because people are not merely evaluating the individual. They are evaluating what that individual represents. That observation brought the focus back to Catherine herself. What made her position particularly unique was the contrast between the attention surrounding her and her apparent reluctance to engage directly with it. Despite widespread discussion, she continued presenting the same carefully controlled public image that had defined much of her royal life. To supporters, that consistency reinforced confidence. To critics, it raised additional questions. Was her restraint simply personal preference, or did it reflect a larger strategic calculation? The answer remained elusive, but the mystery only increased interest in what would happen once the diplomatic gathering finally began. By this stage, many observers believed the evening would reveal more than protocol. They expected clues about priorities, relationships, and future direction. Not because anyone would necessarily make dramatic announcements, but because royal institutions often communicate most effectively through what they choose to emphasize. And there was growing reason to believe that emphasis would be noticed. Reports from royal commentators suggested that anticipation inside palace circles had reached unusually high levels. The event was no longer being viewed as a routine engagement. It had become a moment of observation, an opportunity to see whether recent developments reflected temporary circumstances or a deeper transformation already underway. That possibility carried substantial consequences. If perceptions proved accurate, the monarchy could be entering a period in which public attention increasingly shifted toward the generation expected to carry the institution forward. Such transitions are rarely defined by a single event, yet there are often moments that later appear significant in retrospect. Moments when observers realize that a change was already happening long before it became obvious. The approaching gala seemed increasingly likely to become one of those moments. Yet perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the entire situation was that none of the central questions had actually been answered. Why had certain signals emerged now? How much of the speculation reflected reality? What role, if any, had senior figures played in shaping these perceptions? And most importantly, what would happen once the world's cameras began capturing the images that everyone was waiting to see? Because as guests started arriving and attention focused on the grand hall itself, a growing number of royal watchers reached the same conclusion. The real significance of the evening would not lie in any single photograph, seating arrangement, or ceremonial detail. It would lie in whether those details revealed a coordinated vision for the monarchy's future, and the developments that followed would force even longtime observers to reconsider everything they thought they understood about the balance of influence inside the royal family. As the long-awaited evening finally arrived, the significance of everything surrounding it became clearer, not because a dramatic announcement was made, but because the larger pattern that royal observers had been studying for months appeared impossible to ignore. What many people initially interpreted as a conversation about ceremony now seemed connected to a much broader question. How does a centuries-old institution prepare for its future while maintaining confidence in its present? That question sits at the heart of why developments involving Catherine, Princess of Wales, continue to attract such intense attention. The fascination is not simply about one individual, nor is it solely about public popularity. Rather, it concerns what her growing prominence may represent within the monarchy's long-term evolution. Throughout modern royal history, certain figures have emerged as symbols of continuity during periods of transition. Their importance extends beyond the duties they perform. They become representatives of stability itself. Increasingly, many commentators believe Catherine occupies precisely that position. What makes this particularly noteworthy is the manner in which it has occurred. Unlike public figures who build influence through dramatic interventions or highly visible campaigns, the Princess of Wales has largely strengthened her position through consistency. Year after year, engagement after engagement, she has cultivated an image that aligns closely with the qualities monarchies traditionally value most: reliability, discipline, composure, and duty. As a result, discussions about her role often reveal something larger than opinions about one royal family member. They reveal public expectations about the future, and that may ultimately explain why even seemingly symbolic developments have generated so much interest. People are not merely interpreting individual events. They are attempting to understand what those events might signal about the next chapter of the institution itself. For King Charles III, that reality presents both opportunities and challenges. The monarch's reign occupies a unique place in royal history. It serves as a bridge between one era and another, connecting the traditions inherited from previous generations with the realities facing those who will eventually follow. Every decision made during such a period carries additional weight because it can influence how future leadership is perceived. From that perspective, recent developments appear less like isolated moments and more like pieces of a longer narrative. A narrative focused on continuity, a narrative focused on preparation, and perhaps most importantly, a narrative focused on public confidence. Meanwhile, Prince William's position within the story remains equally significant. As the future monarch, he represents the next constitutional chapter of the royal family. Yet institutions rarely prepare future sovereigns in isolation. The strength of future reigns often depends upon the partnerships surrounding them. This is one reason why royal commentators continue examining the role of the Princess of Wales so closely. They recognize that future kings and future queens are not evaluated separately by the public. They are increasingly viewed as a team, a partnership, a representation of what the monarchy may eventually become. That perception carries considerable implications for the years ahead. Public trust, once established, can strengthen an institution's resilience during challenging periods. Conversely, uncertainty about future leadership can create vulnerabilities. Many observers believe the monarchy understands this dynamic extremely well, which is why symbols, appearances, and public roles continue attracting such careful attention. Yet perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the entire story is that no definitive explanation has ever been provided. The absence of clear answers has allowed multiple interpretations to coexist simultaneously. Some see evidence of strategic preparation. Others see natural evolution within the royal family. Still others believe commentators may be reading too much into developments that are ultimately routine. And that uncertainty is precisely what makes the discussion so compelling. Because regardless of which interpretation proves closest to reality, the conversation itself reveals something important. Audiences across Britain, North America, and beyond remain deeply invested in understanding where the monarchy is heading. They are paying attention not simply to today's events, but to tomorrow's possibilities. In many ways, that may be the true significance of everything discussed throughout the story. The reported developments were never really about a single engagement, a single decision, or a single public appearance. They became a lens through which people could examine larger questions about succession, leadership, continuity, and legacy. Questions that every monarchy eventually faces. Questions that become increasingly important as one generation gradually prepares the ground for the next. And perhaps that is why royal observers continue watching so closely. Beneath the headlines, beneath the speculation, and beneath the endless analysis lies a much deeper issue. The British monarchy is not simply preserving its past. It is continuously shaping its future, often through subtle signals that only become fully understood with the benefit of time. Whether recent events represent a major turning point or merely another step in a longer process remains open to interpretation. But one thing is certain: the attention surrounding Catherine, the future role of Prince William, and the broader direction of the institution reflects a growing awareness that significant generational change is steadily approaching. And when future historians look back on this period, they may conclude that the most revealing developments were not the dramatic moments that captured headlines, but the quieter signals that hinted at where the monarchy believed its future truly resided. So what do you think? Were these developments simply routine adjustments within a constantly evolving institution, or do they point toward a larger transformation already unfolding behind palace walls? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the royal family, Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, King Charles III, Princess, and the future of the monarchy, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal analysis. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video. Because in royal history, the moments that seem smallest today are often the ones that reveal the most about tomorrow.